What if the person who shattered your morning coffee ended up changing the rest of your life? When Clara Bennett, a quiet but determined secretary, collided with a stranger at Denver Airport, she never imagined that the man whose suit she ruined would soon become her new boss, Daniel Cole, a billionaire CEO feared for his perfection. Two worlds met that day, one built on compassion, the other on control. But behind power and pride, Daniel hid a grief too heavy to name, and Clara carried a loss she could no longer outrun. Can love survive when careers, reputations, and fear stand in the way? Can two people who once hurt each other learn to heal together without losing themselves? From a fateful airport encounter to a quiet wedding by a Colorado lake, this is a story about redemption, courage, and the kind of love that grows only after the storm. Stay with us. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Shining Stories, because sometimes the story you never expected is the one that stays forever. Denver International Airport smelled faintly of roasted coffee, jet fuel, and too many goodbyes. It was 6:30 in the morning, the kind of hour when the sky hadn't decided whether to wake up or keep dreaming. Clara Bennett adjusted the strap of her leather satchel for the third time in 5 minutes. Her flight to New York was boarding in 40 minutes, and somehow, she still hadn't found Gate 14. The bright digital signs overhead blinked with their endless alphabet soup of letters and numbers. She whispered under her breath, B14. How hard can it be? Her voice was calm, but inside, her heart carried a quiet ache. It had been 3 months since her mother's funeral, since the small house in Boulder had fallen silent, leaving Clara with nothing but photo albums and the kind of loneliness that arrived without invitation. She wasn't running away, she told herself. She was starting over. New York meant a new position, a better salary, and maybe if the universe was kind, a sense of purpose again. Her phone buzzed. A text from her friend Nora read, "You've got this. See, Mom would be proud." Clara smiled faintly, tucking the phone away. Then, chaos. A man in a charcoal suit stepped out from behind a kiosk at the exact moment Clara turned the corner, her paper cup of coffee in hand. The collision was sharp, the liquid hot, and the next few seconds moved in slow motion. Coffee splattering across a pristine white shirt, a briefcase tumbling open, documents scattering like startled birds. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry," Clara gasped, dropping to her knees to gather the papers. The man looked down at her, jaw tight, expression carved from marble. His voice was low and controlled, the kind that could cut through a boardroom. "Clearly, you weren't watching where you were going." Clara froze, glancing up. He was tall, over 6 feet, with dark blonde hair combed too perfectly, and eyes the color of wet steel. His shirt clung to him, stained and dripping, but his irritation seemed untouched by the mess. "I said I'm sorry," she replied, handing him a damp contract page. "You walk straight into—" "I walk straight into you," he interrupted, brushing at the stain with the edge of his handkerchief. Then, almost to himself, unbelievable. Something in his tone, the arrogance, the assumption ignited Clara's temper. She had been polite. She had apologized, but she was done being spoken to like a nuisance. "You know," she said, standing, "most people just accept an apology and move on. You might want to try that sometime." He lifted his gaze, meeting hers with cool detachment. "Most people," he said evenly. "Don't spill boiling coffee on a $1,000 suit before sunrise." Clara blinked. 1,000. You keep receipts for your ego too, or just your wardrobe. The corner of his mouth twitched, though whether it was irritation or amusement, she couldn't tell. "Have a pleasant flight, Miss Bennett," she snapped. "Clara Bennett, and I sincerely hope I never see you again." He gave a curt nod. "Likewise." She turned sharply, her flat squeaking against the polished tile. Her pulse raced. What a self-absorbed jerk. Her cheeks burned with embarrassment and anger, both directed at herself as much as him. 10 minutes later, at Gate 14, She sank into an empty seat near the window. Her hands still trembled slightly as she dabbed at her sleeve with a napkin. The barista had offered her another coffee on the house, but she couldn't face another cup just yet. Outside, the first hints of daylight touched the horizon, streaking the sky with orange and gold. She let out a long breath, trying to shake off the moment. "You're leaving Colorado." "Clara," she reminded herself. "You're moving forward. No more getting stuck on rude strangers in airports." The loudspeaker crackled. "Flight 308 to New York City. Now boarding all passengers at gate 14. Clara gathered her purse and ticket. As she walked down the jet bridge, a small smile flickered at the corner of her lips. Maybe, in a few hours, this would all be funny. The story of how she baptized a stranger's suit in caffeine. Seat 18A window? Perfect. She tucked her bag beneath the seat and leaned back. The familiar hum of the engines settled her nerves. Denver was fading, and so, she hoped, was the heaviness in her chest. She reached for the small silver pendant around her neck, a gift from her mother, a tiny compass with the word onward. It had become her mantra. Just as she began to close her eyes, a voice cut through the cabin noise. "Excuse me, is this seat 18B? Her stomach dropped. No, it couldn't be. But when she looked up, there he was, the same man from the coffee disaster. Suit jacket freshly changed, but expression just as unreadable. "You've got to be kidding me," she whispered. He raised an eyebrow, holding out his boarding pass. "Apparently, fate has a sense of humor." Clara swallowed, forcing a polite smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Don't worry. I don't have any beverages this time." He slid into the seat beside her, adjusting his cufflinks. "Good to know," he said softly, then turned toward the window. The flight attendant's cheerful voice broke the silence, announcing safety procedures. Clara kept her gaze straight ahead, silently counting the minutes until they landed. But as the plane lifted into the pale morning sky, she felt a strange, reluctant awareness of the man beside her. There was something about his stillness, the quiet confidence that came from someone who had nothing to prove and yet everything to protect. For the first time that morning, Clara stopped feeling angry. Instead, she felt curious. And somewhere between the clouds and the thin blue horizon, destiny smiled quietly to itself, because neither of them knew that this was only the first of many collisions to come. The cabin lights dimmed to a soft, honey-colored glow. Outside, the October morning stretched wide and pale across the clouds. Clara Bennett tucked her seatbelt, wishing the next 3 hours would disappear quietly like a bad dream fading with daylight. She still couldn't believe it. Of all the people on this plane, in this massive country, he had to be sitting right next to her. Daniel Cole, the man with the expensive suit, the cool blue eyes, and the attitude of someone who thought the world moved at his convenience. She had hoped never to see him again. Yet here they were side by side. Row 18 hurtling toward New York at 30,000 feet. Maybe, she thought, she could simply ignore him. Pretend the man beside her was invisible. But fate, as always, had other plans. A few minutes after takeoff, a flight attendant appeared beside them, smiling too brightly for that early hour. "Excuse me, ma'am," she said to Clara. "Would you mind switching seats with the gentleman in 19B? He's traveling with his wife, and they'd like to sit together." "Oh," Clara said quickly. "Sure, of course." The attendant turned to Daniel. "Sir, if you don't mind moving back 1 row." Daniel glanced toward the back, then at the seat beside Clara. "Actually, it's fine. I'll stay here." She shouldn't have to move. The attendant blinked. "Are you sure completely?" His tone was polite, final, unmistakably CEO-like. The attendant nodded, retreating with a practiced smile. Clara stared straight ahead. "You didn't have to do that." "I know," Daniel said simply, settling back into his seat. "But you looked like you didn't want to." She opened her mouth to argue, then stopped. He wasn't wrong. She didn't want to move. Not because of him, exactly, but because she was exhausted. Because change, lately, had been the one constant in her life. Still, she muttered, you didn't need to play the hero. I wasn't, he said lightly. Just being practical, she echoed under her breath. Right. Silence stretched between them, filled with the hum of the engines and the faint clatter of drink carts rolling down the aisle. Daniel opened a sleek leather folder on his lap, neatly printed charts, graphs, and what looked like financial reports. Clara caught the faint smell of cedar and coffee as he leaned forward to jot down a note. Businessman, she thought. Probably one of those people who owns half of Manhattan and complains about flight delays like they're personal insults. She turned to the window, forcing her attention on the view. Mountains unspooled beneath them, long ridges of copper and snow fading into distance. From her purse, she pulled out a paperback novel, something light, romantic, entirely predictable, exactly what she needed. But after a few pages, she realized she hadn't absorbed a single sentence. Her eyes kept sliding toward Daniel, who was now flipping through pages with quiet intensity. His brow furrowed slightly, concentration deep. He wasn't frowning in arrogance. She noticed it was more focus. There was a small scar near his left temple, barely visible beneath the perfect hair, a detail she wished she hadn't noticed. She caught herself staring and quickly turned back to her book, cheeks warm. Daniel didn't look up, but a hint of amusement tugged at his voice. Good book, Clara blinked. Excuse me. You've been reading the same page for 10 minutes, he said, eyes still on his papers. Her mouth fell open. How would you even? You were working. He glanced sideways, a small, knowing smile on his lips. I multitask. Oh, you're that kind of person, Clara said, half amused, half annoyed. What kind? The kind who thinks focus is a personality trait. He chuckled softly. And what kind are you, Ms. Bennett? The kind who likes silence on flights, she said firmly, returning to her book, duly noted. He murmured. 20 minutes later, turbulence hit. A sudden jolt rattled the cabin. Overhead bins creaked. Someone gasped 2 rows back. Clara's hand instinctively gripped the armrest. Her stomach flipped, the old familiar panic rising like an unwelcome tide. Flying had never been her strong suit. Daniel's voice came low and steady beside her. You're safe, Ms. Bennett. The words were simple, but they anchored her somehow. He wasn't smiling now, just watching her. Calm, certain. She took a slow breath, then another. I hate turbulence, she admitted quietly. Most people do, he said. It feels like chaos, but it's really just the plane finding balance again. She glanced at him. You sound like you've done this a lot. He nodded. More than I'd like to. Another small tremor ran through the cabin, and Clara's fingers tightened around the armrest again. Without thinking, Daniel's hand brushed lightly against hers, not holding just there, a gesture of reassurance. She didn't pull away. When the shaking stopped, Clara exhaled slowly. Guess we made it? We always do, Daniel said softly. For a moment, their eyes met. Something passed between them. Not romance exactly, not yet, but recognition. Two people who, despite everything, understood the weight of starting over. Then, as if realizing he'd lingered too long, Daniel turned back to his folder, and Clara turned to her window. But the silence that followed wasn't awkward anymore. It was oddly peaceful. As the flight attendants began serving drinks, Clara glanced at Daniel's papers. The company logo at the top read Cole & Partners, New York. The name stirred a vague familiarity, though she couldn't quite place it. She looked up at him, but he was already deep in thought again, pen moving across the page. Something about his composure intrigued her, the quiet confidence of a man who lived inside responsibility. Maybe, she thought, he wasn't as shallow as she'd assumed. Maybe arrogance was just armor, and though she didn't know it yet, she was absolutely right. The taxi pulled up to a building of glass and steel that shimmered beneath the pale Manhattan morning. Cole and Finch Innovations. The letters gleamed above the revolving doors like something permanent, immovable, the opposite of how Clara Bennett felt as she stepped out onto the sidewalk. Her heels clicked against the stone. Her heart clicked even louder. She had rehearsed this day in her mind for weeks. A new job, a new city, a chance to start again. What she hadn't rehearsed was what to do if the past 48 hours decided to follow her into the lobby. Inside, the building hummed with quiet efficiency, glass elevators gliding, phones ringing, the steady rhythm of money and ambition. The receptionist smiled when Clara introduced herself. "Welcome to Cole and Finch, Ms. Bennett. You're our new executive secretary, right?" "Yes," Clara said, smoothing her blazer. "First day, Mr. Cole's assistant will show you to your office. He's in a board meeting right now." Clara froze at the name. "Mr. Cole?" The words echoed in her head like distant thunder. Her pulse skipped. Her thoughts scrambled for reason. Surely it couldn't be him. The man from the airport. The arrogant stranger with the coffee-stained suit. There had to be another Cole. New York was full of them. Right. She followed a young assistant named Marcy through the maze of hallways, trying to appear calm. The air smelled faintly of espresso and ambition. Glass walls framed sleek offices, each more immaculate than the last. Marcy glanced over her shoulder with a friendly grin. "You're going to love it here, Mr. Cole runs a tight ship, but he's brilliant. He rebuilt this company after the merger practically from scratch." "Sounds impressive," Clara managed, her throat dry. "Oh, it is. He expects a lot from his team, but he rewards hard work. Just don't be late. Ever." They stopped outside a corner conference room. Voices buzzed behind the frosted glass. Low, authoritative, businesslike, Marcy whispered. "He's wrapping up the executive meeting now. You'll get to meet him soon." Clara nodded, pretending to check her watch while her pulse hammered in her wrist. "It's fine," she told herself. "Different Cole. Pure coincidence. But fate has a wicked sense of humor." The door swung open, and there he was, Daniel Cole. His suit was navy this time, crisp and perfect. His tie matched the sky outside steel blue, cold and calm. He was surrounded by executives, all mid-conversation, but Clara barely heard a word. Her file slipped from her fingers, scattering papers like white butterflies onto the polished floor. For half a second, Daniel's eyes met hers. Recognition flickered quick, sharp, undeniable. Then, in the space of a breath, his expression cooled into pure professionalism. He bent to pick up one of the fallen pages, handed it back to her without a pause. "Let's keep it professional, Ms. Bennett." Her name fell from his lips like a verdict. Yes, Mr. Cole," she stammered, her cheeks burning. The executives glanced between them, sensing tension but too polite to ask. Daniel turned back to his team, voice steady. "Thank you, everyone. That'll be all for now." They filed out silently, leaving behind the echo of quiet authority. When the last door closed, Clara stood frozen, clutching her folder like a life raft. Daniel walked to the window, his reflection tall against the skyline. "You work here now," he said flatly. "It wasn't a question. Yes, I didn't know. I imagine you didn't." She swallowed. "If this is a problem, It's not a problem." He turned, eyes unreadable. "As long as you remember, this is a workplace." "I understand." He gave a short nod, already reaching for his phone. "Good. Marcy will handle your onboarding. Welcome to Cole and Finch." The dismissal was clear. Clara nodded, backing toward the door. Every nerve in her body screamed to leave to run, to hide, to disappear, but she couldn't. Her savings were gone. Her mother's house, the one she'd promised to keep, still had a mortgage. She needed this job. The rest of the morning moved in slow motion. Marcy showed her the executive floor gleaming desks, digital panels, coffee machines that looked like they belonged in a spaceship. Clara's workspace sat just outside Daniel's glass office, a constant reminder that escape wasn't an option. She typed up schedules, checked emails, filed contracts, anything to look busy, to stay invisible. At one point, Daniel's voice carried through the open door, calm but commanding. He was on a call with investors, discussing product launches, market shifts, deadlines, every word precise, every tone measured. Clara tried not to listen, but something about his confidence drew her in. He wasn't just a man with an expensive suit. He was sharp, intelligent, strategic, and damn it, she could hear the faintest echo of warmth under the professionalism. She shook her head, furious with herself. Don't humanize him, she thought. He made it clear, strictly business. At lunch, Clara escaped to the small park across the street, clutching her sandwich like a shield. The city roared around her honking taxis, snippets of conversation, the distant rumble of subway trains. She took a deep breath. Just get through today. Her phone buzzed with a message from Nora back in Denver. How's New York? How's the new boss? Clara stared at the screen, then typed, He's not what I expected. Then, after a pause, she deleted it and sent, It's going fine. A lie, small but necessaire. Back upstairs. Daniel passed her desk without a glance. A file in hand, phone pressed to his ear. Reschedule the London call for tomorrow, he said to someone unseen, and confirm the client dinner for Thursday. Thank you. His tone was brisk but not cruel, just focused. Still, the silence he left behind felt heavier than any words. By 5 o'clock, Clara's shoulders ached from tension. Marcy popped her head around the corner. You survived your first day. That's a win. Clara smiled weakly. Barely. Marcy grinned. You'll get used to him. He's tough, but fair. And if he didn't fire you for spilling coffee on him, you're already ahead of most. Clara froze. What? Marcy laughed. Kidding, I just mean he's particular. You'll learn his rhythms. Clara forced a laugh, though her heart stumbled. So, he hadn't told anyone. Not yet. That small mercy would have to be enough. When she finally stepped out of the building, the sky had turned to amber and gray. The city lights shimmered against glass towers, reflecting lives in motion. Clara walked toward the subway, clutching her coat tighter. The day had been exhausting, humiliating, and strangely hopeful, because beneath the awkwardness, beneath the cold professionalism, she'd seen something flicker in Daniel's eyes that morning. Recognition, yes, but also restraint. And maybe, she thought, that restraint meant something more complicated than indifference. The next few weeks at Cole & Finch Innovations felt like walking a tightrope. On one side, ambition. On the other, disaster. Clara Bennett balanced somewhere in between. Every morning, Daniel Cole's voice carried through the glass walls of his office measured, calm, never raised, yet sharp enough to slice through excuses. He demanded perfection, precision, and punctuality. And Clara, though capable, found herself constantly measuring every word, every email, every breath. Still, she matched his rhythm. She learned his calendar by heart, his shorthand, his habits, 2 shots of espresso at 8, black coffee at 4, every contract signed in blue ink, never black. He was exacting. She was resilient. Together, they created a quiet storm. One Monday morning, the tension reached a breaking point. They were in the executive boardroom, a glass chamber overlooking the skyline. A presentation with investors had gone sideways. A report hadn't been updated, and somehow the blame drifted toward Clara. Daniel's tone turned crisp. Ms. Bennett, the quarterly data you provided was incomplete. Clara straightened her shoulders, pulse racing. With respect, Mr. Cole, I used the file your assistant forwarded last night. The numbers hadn't been finalized. The room went still. Executives exchanged wary glances. No one ever corrected Daniel Cole. Daniel's eyes narrowed, not in anger, but in assessment. "So you're saying my office sent outdated figures?" "Yes," she said evenly, refusing to back down. "And I should have double-checked. That's on me." A long pause. Then, to everyone's surprise, Daniel said quietly, "Noted. We'll correct it." The meeting resumed, though the air never quite recovered. When it ended, the executives fled the room like survivors of a storm. Only Clara lingered, gathering her notes. Daniel spoke without looking up from his laptop. "You don't hesitate to speak your mind." She froze. "Would you rather I didn't?" A corner of his mouth twitched. "I value honesty, even when it's inconvenient." Clara exhaled softly. "Then we'll get along fine, as long as you don't mind being corrected." This time, he did look up. Their eyes met across the table, challenge and admiration flickering like twin flames. For a moment, the city noise faded. There was only the hum of the air vent, and two people realizing they had found an equal. The following days brought a strange kind of rhythm. They argued about meeting formats, about deadlines, about the color scheme of presentation slides. But beneath the friction, something else pulsed quietly, a shared language of competence. Late one evening, Clara was still at her desk, typing up reports while the rest of the office had long gone home. The only light came from the glow of her monitor and the faint reflection of Daniel pacing in his office. When she finally shut down her computer, she found him standing beside the espresso machine in the break room, sleeves rolled up, tie loosened. "You're still here?" he said. "So are you," she replied, reaching for her coat. He glanced at her stack of folders. Quarterly projections, among other things. Without a word, he picked up a mug, filled it, and handed it to her. "Here, no one does their best work exhausted." Clara blinked. "You're making coffee for your employee. I'm making coffee for someone who's been here since 7 he said evenly. The tone was soft, but something in it made her chest tighten. She took the cup. "Thank you." "Cream and sugar?" he asked. She smiled faintly. "Just black. Like my boss's heart." Daniel laughed quietly, unexpectedly. "Careful, Ms. Bennett?" That almost sounded like humor. "Almost," she said, hiding a smile behind the rim of her mug. For the first time, the air between them didn't hum with tension. It hummed with something else, something warmer. Later that night, Clara sat in her small apartment, reviewing notes for the next day. Her phone buzzed with a message from Marcy. "Mr. Cole actually smiled today. Did you see it? Historic moment." Clara laughed out loud. She typed back, "He's human after all." But even as she joked, her thoughts drifted back to that quiet moment in the break room, the way his voice softened when he said, "You're still here." Maybe, she thought, there was more to Daniel Cole than his reputation. The next afternoon, Clara overheard something that made her blood run cold. She was in the copy room when two junior analysts walked in, unaware she was behind the shelves. "Bennett," one whispered, "she's only here because she's pretty. Cole probably likes having her around." The other snorted, "Please." "He doesn't like anyone." "But yeah, she's just playing the sympathy card. Tragic backstory. New city. Poor little secretary." Their laughter felt like static in her ears. She gripped the edge of the counter until her knuckles turned white. She wanted to turn around, to confront them, but the words stuck in her throat. When they left, she stood there for a long time, staring at the floor, the anger and humiliation mixing into something heavy and hollow. That evening, Daniel was in his office long after everyone else had gone. He stood by the window, city lights flickering below like 1,000 restless thoughts. His expression was unreadable, but his jaw was tight. Outside, Clara was packing her things when she noticed her name on a folder on his desk. She froze, afraid she'd made another mistake. But then she saw the email he was drafting to all staff subject professional conduct, Reminder Cole and Finch prides itself on respect, integrity, and merit. Disparaging colleagues, especially those new to our team, will not be tolerated. We rise by lifting others. He didn't mention her name. He didn't need to. Clara watched from her desk, unseen, as he hit send. Then he leaned back, eyes closing for just a moment, as if the act had cost him something unseen. For the first time, she realized Daniel Cole wasn't the man she'd assumed he was. He was complex, guarded, perhaps even lonely, and she, against her better judgment, was beginning to care. It was nearly 8 in the evening when Clara finally shut down her computer. The office floor was quiet now, just the hum of the city below and the soft glow of lights reflected on the glass walls. She packed her things slowly, shoulders heavy with fatigue. Daniel's door was closed, though a thin line of light still slipped from beneath it. He was always the last to leave. Clara hesitated for a moment, then turned off her desk lamp and stepped into the elevator. Outside, the October air bit gently at her cheeks. She crossed the street toward the subway when something caught her eye, a familiar figure stepping out of a black town car across the block. Daniel. He wasn't in his usual armor of confidence. His jacket hung open, his tie loosened, one hand clutching a small bouquet of white lilies. For the first time, he looked unsure. Curiosity tugged at her, quiet but persistent. She followed from a distance as he entered the sliding doors of St. Luke's Medical Center. Inside, the fluorescent lights hummed softly over antiseptic floors. Nurses moved briskly, voices low. Clara kept her distance, her footsteps soundless. Daniel stopped at the front desk, speaking to a nurse. "Room 214, please," he said, his tone gentle different, almost fragile. When he disappeared down the hallway, Clara's conscience warred with her curiosity. She shouldn't be here. It was none of her business. But something deeper whispered, "You need to understand him." She waited a moment, then walked slowly in the same direction. At the end of the corridor, she saw him through the open doorway. Daniel sat beside a hospital bed, the lilies resting in a plastic vase on the nightstand. In the bed lay an older man, thin, gray-haired, eyes wandering the ceiling with the vague confusion of someone lost between past and present. Daniel leaned forward, speaking softly. "Hey, Dad. It's me, Danny." His father blinked, uncertain. "Danny. Yes." Daniel's smile trembled at the edges. "You remember me?" The older man frowned, then looked past him. "The shop? I left the shop open?" "No." "Dad, it's closed. Everything's fine." He reached out, taking his father's hand, the gesture simple, but the emotion behind it felt raw, unguarded. Clara stood frozen, her throat tightening. When Daniel finally stepped out of the room, she almost turned to leave, but the hallway betrayed her. Her shoe squeaked against the floor. He looked up instantly, startled. "Ms. Bennett." Clara flushed. I didn't mean to intrude. I was just..." He let out a slow breath, then shook his head. "It's all right. You're not intruding." She hesitated, glancing toward the door. "Your father?" He nodded. "Alzheimer's. Been getting worse lately." "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "Don't be..." He leaned against the wall, exhaustion softening his posture. "He doesn't remember much anymore. But I still come every week. Habit. Maybe." Clara folded her arms, unsure what to say. She had never seen him like this. No sharp edges, no control, just a man standing in the middle of his own grief. After a long pause, she asked gently, "How long has he been sick?" "Almost 5 years." He glanced down at his hands, the knuckles pale. "My mother passed when I was 19. He raised me alone, worked 16-hour days in a carpentry shop, never complained." Clara blinked, surprised. "A carpenter." Daniel nodded. "Yeah, we didn't have much. He used to build furniture in the garage. I helped him sand the wood when I was a kid. He used to say, measure twice, cut once, and never sell something you wouldn't keep yourself. And a faint smile crossed his face, tender and distant. Funny how I ended up building companies instead of tables. Clara's heart ached. The picture didn't fit the man. She thought she knew the man, of immaculate suits and iron control. I always assumed, she started, then stopped. He finished for her, that I grew up rich with a silver spoon. She looked away, embarrassed, something like that. Daniel chuckled softly, though there was no malice in it, no silver anything, just splinters and sawdust. He exhaled, glancing toward the room again. My father used to tell me, don't be afraid to get your hands dirty. I guess I took that too literally. Clara tilted her head. You built this empire from scratch, didn't you? He shrugged, with a few lucky breaks and a lot of mistakes. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The hospital intercom crackled softly in the distance, paging a doctor to the emergency wing. Finally, Clara said, you know, people at the office, they only see one version of you, the untouchable one. He gave a quiet laugh. Good. That version gets things done. But it also scares them. She said, it scared me. His gaze met hers, steady but unguarded now. And what about now? She hesitated. Now, I'm not sure what to think. Good, he said again, softer this time. Because neither am I. They walked together down the hallway toward the exit, the silence between them no longer sharp, but thoughtful. Outside, the night had turned crisp and clear, city lights glowing in puddles on the pavement. Daniel stopped near the curb, turning to her. Thank you, he said quietly. For what? For not pretending you didn't see me. She smiled faintly. You're welcome. But you know, you don't always have to be made of marble. He studied her for a moment, a faint crease between his brows. Marble cracks, he said finally. Maybe that's how the light gets in, she replied. He didn't answer, but the smallest smile ghosted his lips before he opened the car door. Good night, Ms. Bennett. Good night, Mr. Cole. She watched as the car disappeared down the street, headlights cutting through the autumn mist. And for the first time since meeting him, Clara didn't see Daniel Cole, the demanding CEO, the impossible perfectionist. She saw a son, a man trying to remember who he was before the world told him to be flawless. And somehow, that made her feel less alone. At Cole and Finch, chaos rarely looked dramatic. It was quieter than that, emails at midnight, conference calls at dawn, and the hum of printers that never seemed to stop. But when the Aurora project began to unravel, even the calmest corners of the company trembled. It started with a single missed report, then a manufacturing delay in Chicago, then a breach in a software prototype that threatened a multi-million-dollar deal with overseas investors. By Tuesday morning, the boardroom was a battlefield of clipped sentences and restless energy. Daniel Cole stood at the head of the long glass table, sleeves rolled to his forearms, eyes sharp and unreadable. Let's be clear, he said, his tone steady. If Aurora fails, it's not just a product delay, it's a credibility crisis. And we don't survive those twice. Clara sat across from him, notebook open, trying to keep up as charts flashed on the wall. Her role had suddenly expanded. The executive secretary was now acting project coordinator, a title born of desperation, not promotion. Daniel's gaze met hers. Ms. Bennett, you'll handle team logistics until further notice. I want status updates every 3 hours. She blinked. Every 3 hours. Correct? That's frequent? He arched an eyebrow. Would you prefer failure on a more convenient schedule? A few people chuckled nervously. Clara bit the inside of her cheek. He's impossible. But beneath the irritation, another thought whispered, he's terrified of losing this. By Wednesday, the office looked like a war zone. Pizza boxes replaced conference folders. Coffee cups multiplied faster than spreadsheets. Clara worked side by side with Daniel from early morning until long past midnight. He barked instructions. She countered with precision. They argued, debated, compromised each exchange, sharpening their rhythm like the tightening of a violin string. At 1 Muia, she found him hunched over a laptop, tie discarded, hair slightly mussed. He looked up as she entered with another round of data. "Those are the corrected figures from finance," she said, "and I rechecked the vendor reports." He scanned them, nodded once. "You caught an error here." She leaned closer. Which one? He pointed. "This cost projection." "You reversed 2 digits." She frowned. "No, that's not me. That's the supplier's typo." He looked again, expression softening. "You're right. My mistake." Clara blinked. "Did you just say you're wrong?" Daniel smirked faintly. "Don't let it go to your head, Ms. Bennett." She laughed quietly, surprising both of them. The hours blurred. Midnight became 2, 2 became 4. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, Manhattan's skyline glowed like a restless constellation. At one point, Clara caught Daniel rubbing his temples. She poured him another cup of coffee without asking. He accepted it silently, then murmured, "You should rest." "I could say the same to you," she replied. "I don't rest until it's fixed. You can't control everything." His eyes lifted, tired but unwavering. "Control isn't the goal. Completion is." She smiled faintly. "You sound like a carpenter." He paused, studying her. "My father would have liked that." The mention of his father softened the air between them. For a few heartbeats, the office didn't feel like a workplace. It felt like shared ground. By Friday morning, they were both running on caffeine and instinct. The Aurora project had stabilized. Barely. Clara had coordinated 12 teams, rescheduled 2 international calls, and even rewritten portions of the final investor memo herself. During a tense call with Singapore, Daniel's mic malfunctioned. Without thinking, Clara slid her chair closer, reading his notes aloud, her voice steady and clear. The call ended with applause from the other side of the world. Daniel turned to her, an unreadable look in his eyes. "Well done," she exhaled, realizing she'd been holding her breath. "Thank you." He leaned back, watching her for a moment. "You're different when you're leading." She raised an eyebrow. "Different, how less cautious. More fearless." "Desperation looks good on me," she said dryly. He laughed under his breath, but his gaze lingered. There was something about that look steady, assessing, and yet unexpectedly gentle. And for the first time since the chaos began, Clara felt something shift inside her. "Why do I care so much about how he looks at me?" She tried to shake it off, focusing on the spreadsheet before her, but the question clung like static. That night, when the last employee finally left, the building exhaled. Only 2 lights remained, hers and his. Clara rubbed her eyes, standing to stretch. Daniel was by the window, hands in his pockets, staring out over the city. She walked over quietly, unsure why. "The numbers are solid now," she said. "Aurora's back on track." He nodded, his reflection ghosting against the glass. "You did good work, Clara." Her name without Ms. Bennett caught her off guard. It sounded different coming from him. Softer. Personal. "Thank you," she said. "You too." He smiled faintly. "You mean I wasn't a tyrant this week?" "Oh, you were," she teased, "but at least an efficient one." The city stretched beneath them, rivers of light winding through streets that never slept. They stood side by side in silence, the tension of the week dissolving into something else, something quieter, almost peaceful. Clara sipped her coffee, then said softly, "Do you ever stop?" Even for a minute, Daniel's reflection met hers in the glass. "When the world lets me, maybe you need to stop waiting for permission." He didn't answer. Just watched the first hint of dawn creep between the buildings. Pale gold spilled slowly across the skyline, turning the glass towers into mirrors. Beautiful. Clara whispered. Yes, Daniel said quietly. It is. When she turned toward him, she found he wasn't looking at the sunrise. He was looking at her. She looked away quickly, heart thudding. Don't read into that, he said after a moment, half teasing. I was admiring the productivity of the city, Clara laughed, the sound soft and tired and full of something she didn't dare name. Of course, Mr. Cole, she said. But as the light grew stronger, she knew the storm between them hadn't passed. It had only changed direction. The week after the Aurora storm ended, the office returned to its familiar rhythm: emails, meetings, polite chatter. But inside Clara Bennett's mind, nothing felt the same. The sunrise she'd watched with Daniel Cole kept replaying like a scene she wasn't supposed to remember, but couldn't forget. He'd gone back to being the immaculate CEO, every tie straight, every sentence measured, yet sometimes. She caught him glancing her way during meetings, his gaze softening for half a heartbeat before hardening again. And then, on a quiet Thursday evening, the rhythm broke. The company floor was nearly empty when Clara walked past the CEO's office, ready to head home. Through the half-open door, she saw Daniel sitting at his desk, not typing, not reading, just staring at a framed photo. It was the same image she'd glimpsed before, a young boy on a wooden dock beside an older man holding a fishing rod. She hesitated at the doorway. Long day. Daniel looked up, startled. Then, seeing her, he managed a small, tired smile. The longest. May I? She asked, gesturing to the chair across from him. He nodded. You're off the clock. Ms. Bennett? I noticed you weren't, she replied softly, sitting down. For a long moment, neither spoke. The hum of the city beyond the window filled the silence. Finally, Daniel exhaled. Do you ever feel like the harder you work, the further away peace gets? Clara tilted her head. I used to think peace was the reward for working hard enough. Now, I'm not so sure. He nodded slowly, rubbing the bridge of his nose. My father used to say something like that. Said a man who can't rest doesn't own his success. It owns him. She smiled faintly. Your father sounds wise. He was, Daniel said quietly, until the illness started stealing him, piece by piece. Clara's heart tightened. The Alzheimer's. He nodded. He doesn't remember me anymore. Sometimes he calls me his brother. Sometimes he just stares like I'm a stranger. The room fell still. I visit him twice a week, Daniel continued. Even when he doesn't know who I am, I talk about work, tell him about projects, the company. But lately, I've realized I'm talking to convince myself that it still matters. His voice broke slightly at the edges, like fine glass under pressure. I'm terrified, Clara, he admitted. Not of losing money or clients, but of losing myself the way he did. Forgetting everything I built, everyone I cared about. I can't let that happen. Something in his tone, a quiet desperation, cut through the polished armor she'd always seen around him. Clara leaned forward. You're not your father. Daniel. His eyes met hers, raw and unguarded. Aren't we all just echoes of our parents trying to prove we can make different mistakes? For once. She didn't know what to say. So, she reached across the desk, her fingers brushing his hand before she even realized what she was doing. He froze, eyes flicking down to their joined hands. Then he didn't pull away. Clara's voice was barely above a whisper. You're not an echo. You're a builder. And builders remember how things fit together, even when the world falls apart. Something flickered in his eyes. Gratitude, maybe, or longing. They stayed like that for a long, fragile moment, the quiet between them pulsing with something they hadn't dared to name. When Daniel finally spoke, his voice was softer. Clara, why do you always know what to say? She smiled faintly. Because I've spent most of my life trying to talk myself out of falling apart. He let out a breath of something close to a laugh. Then you're better at it than I am. Silence again, but not the cold kind this time. It felt alive, electric. Daniel's gaze drifted from her eyes to her lips. The distance between them seemed to collapse, inch by inch. Clara's heartbeat thundered in her ears. She didn't move, couldn't. The air thickened. His breath brushed her cheek warm, uncertain. And then, the sharp buzz of a phone shattered the moment. Daniel blinked, pulling back as if waking from a dream. He reached for his phone, irritation flashing across his face. "It's the Singapore team," he said, his tone clipped again. "They're having trouble with the update." Clara stood quickly, pretending to adjust her bag. "Of course. I'll leave you to it." "Clara," he began, but she was already at the door. "It's fine," she said, without looking back. "We both have work to do." The next morning, Daniel didn't appear in the office until noon. He skipped their morning check-in, sent clipped replies to her memos, and avoided eye contact during the leadership meeting. By late afternoon, the distance between them felt like a canyon. Clara tried to focus on work, but her thoughts kept looping back to that moment in his office, the closeness, the look in his eyes, the way his hand had trembled under hers. What were we about to do, she wondered, and worse, what does it mean that I wanted it? When she finally stepped into the elevator at 6 p.m., Daniel's voice echoed behind her. "Ms. Bennett." She turned. He was standing at the end of the hall, jacket slung over his shoulder, expression unreadable. "I owe you an apology," he said quietly. "For what? For last night? I shouldn't have." He stopped, searching for words. "I shouldn't have crossed that line." Clara's throat tightened. "Nothing happened. That's the problem," he said. Something almost did. For a heartbeat, the air between them buzzed with everything unsaid. "Daniel," she said softly, "you don't have to apologize for being human." His jaw tightened. "That's precisely what I have to apologize for." And before she could answer, he turned and walked away. That night, Clara sat by her apartment window, staring at the Denver skyline washed in the amber glow of streetlights. She thought of her mother, her soft voice saying, "Don't be afraid to love complicated people. They're the ones who teach you who you are." But she also heard another voice, her own warning her not to repeat her mother's mistakes, not to lose herself in someone who might never let her in. She sighed, pressing her palms together. "He's my boss. My past and his are both heavy. This can't be love. Not yet." Still, when she finally drifted to sleep, she dreamed of a quiet room, a trembling hand, and the whisper of almost. The first sign of trouble came on a Tuesday morning. The rain had started before dawn, thin, relentless, the kind that seemed to soak through walls and willpower alike. Inside Cole and Finch Innovations, tension was thicker than the clouds over Manhattan. The Aurora project, their triumph only weeks ago, had turned to quicksand. A critical client pulled out after a system malfunction, accusing the company of negligence. Within hours, 3 news outlets picked up the story. By noon, the company's stock price began to fall. Daniel Cole didn't blink when the first alert came through. He simply straightened his tie, walked into the boardroom, and began issuing commands. Cancel tomorrow's investor luncheon. Move the press briefing to Thursday. And anyone tell marketing not to say the word innovation until I say so. His tone was calm, but his knuckles were white against the edge of the table. Clara watched from her corner of the room, notebook open, heart heavy. He looked composed, but she could see the storm behind his eyes. By mid-afternoon, the headlines were everywhere. Cole and Finch faces major setback. Aurora collapse raises questions about leadership. Daniel Cole's empire in crisis. Every ping from her phone felt like another blow. She passed him a printed report without a word. He didn't thank her this time, just nodded stiffly, jaw clenched. The silence between them was no longer comfortable. It was protective. At 4 p.m., a senior board member cornered her near the elevator. "Clara," he said in a low voice, "take my advice, keep your distance. When the press smells blood, anyone near the source gets torn apart. She frowned. I'm just doing my job. Exactly, he said. Don't make it personal. But it already was. By evening, most of the staff had gone home. The office was a graveyard of half-empty coffee cups and unread memos. Clara found Daniel still in the boardroom, jacket off, tie loose, staring at the projection of a falling stock chart. The glow of the screen cast harsh shadows across his face. They're calling for an internal investigation, he said without looking at her. Half the board wants my resignation. The other half wants my head on a stick. Clara set a cup of coffee beside him. You're not responsible for a technical failure you didn't cause. He gave a bitter laugh. In this chair, responsibility is the only thing that's mine. She wanted to argue, to remind him of every hour he'd fought to save that project, every decision he'd made with impossible pressure, but the exhaustion in his voice stopped her. He wasn't angry. He was defeated. Daniel, she said gently, you've rebuilt before. You'll rebuild again. He looked at her, then really looked at her. Do you honestly believe that? She hesitated only a second. Yes. Something in his expression softened, but only for a moment. Then you're the only one who does. That night, the rain turned heavy, drumming against the glass like restless fingers. Most of the city had gone to sleep, but Clara stayed. She couldn't explain why, only that leaving felt like betrayal. From her desk, she watched Daniel pacing his office, the city lights flickering across his reflection. At 11:42 p.m., she finally walked in. He was leaning against the window, staring out at the storm. You should go home, he said, not turning around. I will, she replied. After you do. He let out a humorless laugh. That might be days from now. Then I'll bring extra coffee. That got him to turn. His eyes were tired, more than tired, haunted. Clara, he said quietly, you don't have to do this. Do what be here. Get dragged into something that's already burning down. She stepped closer, her voice firm but gentle. You don't have to fight alone. The words hung there, soft but unshakable. For a moment, the only sound was the rain. Daniel looked at her like he was seeing her for the first time, not as an employee, not even as the woman who once spilled coffee on him in an airport, but as someone who stayed. I've spent my whole life fighting, he said finally, for control, for success, for the next victory, but maybe. He paused, his throat tightening. Maybe I already stopped fighting the wrong things. Clara's breath caught. What do you mean? He shook his head slightly, a faint, almost weary smile touching his lips. I mean, he said, I've been fighting to prove I could stand alone. Maybe what I should have been fighting for was someone who wouldn't let me. Their eyes met. Lightning flashed beyond the windows, tracing silver across the glass. In that fragile light, they both seemed less like boss and secretary, and more like two people caught in the same storm, each trying to keep the other from drowning. Later that night, after he'd left for the hospital to see his father again, Clara lingered at her desk. Outside, the rain finally eased to a whisper. On her screen, a new message appeared, an internal memo announcing an emergency board meeting scheduled for Friday. Her stomach tightened. They're going to vote him out. She closed the laptop, staring into the dim office. She should have felt afraid. Instead, she felt resolve. Whatever came next, she wouldn't abandon him. Not when the rest of the world already had. The city never really slept. But that night, it felt like it was holding its breath. A soft mist hung over Manhattan, blurring the skyline into watercolor. Inside, Cole and Finch. Only two lights glowed against the glass, his office and hers. The clock on the wall ticked toward midnight. Outside, the storm had quieted, leaving behind a world washed clean. Clara Bennett sat at the conference table, papers spread around her like the remnants of a battle. Everywhere she looked, data sheets, reports, Drafts of statements, chaos waited to be tamed, but her mind wasn't on the words in front of her. It kept drifting to the man pacing by the window. Daniel Cole looked different tonight. No jacket, sleeves rolled, tie undone. For the first time since she'd met him, he seemed human, not a symbol of control, but a man carrying too much weight on shoulders, too tired to bear it. He turned suddenly, catching her watching him. What he asked, half a smile ghosting across his face. Clara shook her head. You're thinking too loudly. That earned a quiet laugh. You can hear that. It's hard to miss. She gestured at the window. You've been staring at the same skyline for 20 minutes. I'm pretty sure the buildings aren't going anywhere. He walked closer, stopping just beside the table. I'm trying to figure out how everything unraveled so fast, he said softly. How something that looked perfect could fall apart overnight. Clara glanced at the papers between them. Maybe it wasn't perfect. Maybe it was just pretending to be. Daniel studied her. And there it was again, that look. The one that made her feel seen in a way that terrified her. You make chaos look like peace, he said quietly. The words hit harder than they should have. Not because of what he said, but how he said it as if he wasn't talking about the project, or the company, or the falling stock, but about her. She tried to laugh it off. That's an exaggeration. I don't exaggerate, he said, his voice steady, low. Not about this. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The air between them shifted, not heavier, not darker, just different. Daniel's eyes softened. Do you ever wonder, he said slowly, if the worst things in our lives happen just to push us toward what we were avoiding? Clara hesitated. You mean this? He didn't answer. He didn't have to. The hum of the city outside filled the silence. The glow from the window painted faint halos on the glass. Daniel stepped closer, slow enough for her to stop him if she wanted to. She didn't. His hand brushed the edge of the table, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his skin. Every instinct told her to look away, to pull back, to remember every professional line between them. Instead, she whispered, Daniel. He froze at the sound of his name. Then, so quietly she barely heard it, he said, Clara. Something broke open inside her. All the restraint, the tension, the weeks of denying what was already true, they dissolved in that one shared breath. When he leaned forward, she didn't move away. The kiss wasn't planned. It wasn't a grand gesture or a rush of passion. It was the opposite, quiet, trembling, real. His lips met hers with the gentleness of someone touching something fragile for the first time. Her hands, still holding the edge of the report, loosened and fell to her lap. The city lights flickered across the glass, shimmering like distant stars. She could feel the rhythm of his heartbeat through the space between them, steady, hesitant, then steady again. When they finally pulled apart, neither spoke. There was no need. The air seemed to hum softly around them, as if even the world understood that something had shifted. Daniel was the first to break the silence. I shouldn't have done that, he said, voice low, eyes searching hers for permission or forgiveness or both. Clara's heart was still racing, but her voice was calm. Maybe we both did. He closed his eyes briefly, as if trying to steady himself. You know what this means. Yes, she said. And I also know what it doesn't. He looked at her, puzzled. What doesn't it mean? It doesn't mean I'll stop believing in you, she whispered. Even if everything else falls apart. For the first time in weeks. Daniel smiled. Not the CEO smile. Not the rehearsed one, but something real. Something softer. Outside, the city kept shining. Unaware that two people inside a glass tower had just changed the course of their lives. That night, when Clara finally left the building, dawn was brushing its first light against the horizon. The storm had passed. The air smelled of wet concrete and beginnings. She paused by the glass doors, her reflection faint beside his silhouette still standing at the window above. For a heartbeat, She thought he might look down and see her. He didn't, but she smiled anyway, because for once, she didn't need to be seen to know she mattered. The morning after the storm of emotions, the city looked too bright, too ordinary. Sunlight spilled through the windows of Cole and Finch, cold and clinical, as if the night before had never happened. But Clara Bennett remembered. Every glance, every breath, every second of silence before the world returned to motion. When she entered the office, Daniel Cole was already there. Impeccable suit, calm expression, armor back in place. He didn't look up as she passed his open door. "Good morning, Mr. Cole," she said quietly. He nodded once. "Close the door, please." Her stomach tightened. She obeyed. He waited until the click of the latch echoed through the glass walls, then spoke in a voice that could have been carved from ice. "What happened last night," he said evenly, "stays between us. Do I make myself clear?" The words hit her harder than she expected. "Yes, sir." She managed. "This company," he continued, "is under scrutiny. The last thing we need is gossip. I can't afford distractions. Neither can you." "Distractions," she repeated softly, the word bitter on her tongue. He didn't meet her eyes. "You understand why this is necessary." She opened her mouth to respond, then stopped. There was nothing she could say that wouldn't sound small, so she just nodded, holding her composure until she reached the hallway. Outside, the sound of keyboards and muted conversation filled the air, but all she could hear was her own heartbeat, loud and uneven. All morning, she tried to focus on her tasks, emails, scheduling, reports, numbers, but the words on the screen refused to make sense. Every time she looked up, Daniel's door was closed. The distance between them now felt larger than the night sky. Was I just another mistake for him, she thought? Another error he'd file under things that should not have happened at noon. She went to refill her coffee. The break room was unusually crowded, and the hum of whispers quieted when she walked in. Two junior assistants exchanged quick glances. One of them, Maggie, from PR, looked at Clara with a mix of pity and curiosity. "Morning," Clara said evenly. "Morning," Maggie replied, her voice a little too bright. As Clara poured her coffee, she caught fragments of conversation behind her. Late-night meeting with the CEO. Sudden promotion last month. Guess sleeping near power pays off. The cup in Clara's hand trembled slightly. She turned, eyes calm but hard. "If you have something to ask, you can ask me directly." Maggie flushed. "It's just, people talk. You know how it is." "Yes," Clara said. "I know exactly how it is." And she walked out, leaving silence in her wake. By the afternoon, the rumors had grown legs. Someone claimed they'd seen Daniel leaving the office with her late at night. Someone else said she'd used her influence to get her role on the Aurora project. By 3 p.m., she could feel the judgment in every sideways glance, every half-finished sentence. In the elevator, two employees stopped talking as soon as she stepped in. On the 37th floor, a receptionist smiled too sweetly before turning to whisper to a colleague. It was the kind of quiet cruelty that didn't need proof, just repetition. When Daniel finally emerged from his office for the board briefing, he walked past her without so much as a glance. That hurt most of all. At 6, the office began to empty. Clara sat at her desk long after the others had gone, staring at the glow of her computer screen until it blurred. Her phone buzzed a text from her sister. "Lauren, how's New York treating you? You sound tired in your messages." "Are you okay?" she typed back slowly. "Just work. I'll call soon." She didn't mention that her job, the one she'd fought to keep, no longer felt like safety. It felt like exile. When she finally gathered her things, she caught sight of Daniel through the glass wall of his office. He was still working, head bowed, shoulders tense. She almost walked in, almost said the words that were burning in her chest. But he'd made himself clear. What happened last night stays between us. So, she turned away. That night, back in her small apartment, Clara opened her laptop and stared at her resignation letter. It wasn't the first time she'd thought about quitting, but it was the first time it felt inevitable. She typed slowly, carefully, as if each word were a stitch closing a wound. Dear Mr. Cole, I want to express my gratitude for the opportunity to work at Cole & Finch. The past months have challenged and changed me in ways I'll carry for the rest of my life. However, I believe it's best for both the company and myself if I step away from my position, effective at the end of the week. Respectfully, Clara Bennett. She read it twice, then saved the draft. Her eyes stung, but she refused to cry. Tears, she'd decided long ago, were a luxury for people who hadn't learned how to start over. She stood, went to the window, and looked out at the city that had taken so much and still offered nothing back. Below, yellow cabs streaked through the wet streets, headlights glowing like restless fireflies. Somewhere in one of those towers, Daniel was probably still awake, rewriting his next plan, chasing the next victory. And she realized she didn't hate him for it. She just couldn't stay near him anymore. The apartment was quiet, except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the soft scratching of the pen against paper. Clara Bennett sat at her kitchen table, the glow of a single lamp spilling over a half-finished letter. Outside, New York pulsed on taxis, sirens, the heartbeat of a city that never waited for anyone. Her resignation had been accepted 2 days ago. The message from HR had been polite, efficient, impersonal. No word from Daniel, not a text, not an email, not even a look across the hallway. So now, she wrote the words she knew she would never send. Dear Daniel, I don't know why I'm writing this. Maybe because silence feels heavier than anything I could say aloud. You taught me something I didn't expect to learn here. That strength isn't control, it's compassion. And leadership isn't about standing above people, but beside them. You taught me that, even when you didn't mean to. I don't know what last night meant to you. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe it was just exhaustion and misplaced comfort. But for me, it was the first time in a long time I didn't feel like I had to hold myself together. You once said, chaos doesn't scare you because you know how to rebuild. I hope that's true. Because whatever is breaking around you right now, it isn't beyond repair. Goodbyes aren't always forever. Daniel. Sometimes they're just a way of giving each other room to grow. Clara. She read the letter twice, her eyes tracing each line as if memorizing a secret she would bury. Then she folded it carefully and placed it inside an unaddressed envelope. She slid it into the drawer beside her bed, where it would stay, hidden but not forgotten. The next morning, Clara packed her life into 2 suitcases and left New York before sunrise. Denver. The air was thinner here, clearer. The mountains stood still in the distance like patient witnesses. Her father's house smelled of cedar and thyme. He greeted her with a frail smile from the armchair by the window. His hair had gone fully gray, his hands trembling slightly as he reached for hers. Didn't think I'd see you back so soon, he said. She smiled softly. Didn't think I'd leave so soon. They both laughed a little, though the sound was more fragile than joyful. In the weeks that followed, life found a slower rhythm. Mornings were spent helping her father with breakfast, afternoons tending to the small garden behind the house. At night, she sat on the porch with a blanket around her shoulders, watching the stars blink awake. There was peace here, real peace. But peace, she learned, has a way of making you listen to the questions you've avoided. Was she healing or hiding? Some nights, she'd dream of the city, the sound of Daniel's voice echoing in a glass office, the glow of lights on his face as dawn rose behind him. She'd wake up unsure whether the ache in her chest was nostalgia or unfinished business. Once, while sorting through old papers, she found the silver compass her mother had given her, the one that said, "Onward." She held it in her palm for a long time. "Forward," she whispered, but to where hundreds of miles away, in the heart of Manhattan, Daniel Cole sat alone in his office. The The glass walls that once made him feel powerful now made him feel exposed. The press had quieted, but the board's pressure hadn't. Investors had lost faith. Employees had lost confidence. He'd spent his career mastering control numbers, markets, outcomes. But now, staring at the empty chair across from his desk, he realized control was the very thing he'd used to keep people out, especially her. He hadn't noticed how often he'd looked for her reflection in the glass until it was gone. He tried to focus on the spreadsheets before him, but his mind kept circling back to that final conversation. What happened last night stays between us. The words echoed like a curse. He'd said them to protect them both, or so he told himself. But now, he saw them for what they were, a wall built out of fear. That afternoon, during a meeting with his board, Daniel's assistant handed him the latest financial report. The numbers were grim. One of the directors spoke sharply. "Your team doesn't trust leadership anymore. Daniel, they follow your orders, but not your vision. They don't believe in you." He didn't argue, because, for the first time, he understood. A company could survive losses. What it couldn't survive was losing faith. And that was exactly what he'd done. Not just theirs, Clara's too. That realization settled deep into his chest like a quiet kind of pain. Back in Denver, winter crept in softly. Clara sat by the fireplace, her father dozing beside her, and flipped through the news on her tablet. She paused when she saw the headline, "Cole and Finch, CEO, vows restructure, we lost our way." The article quoted Daniel admitting to internal failures, promising a cultural rebuild and a renewed focus on integrity. He didn't blame anyone else. He didn't hide. Clara smiled faintly. Maybe he was finally learning that strength wasn't silence, it was honesty. She closed the tablet, the firelight dancing in her eyes. For the first time since leaving, she didn't feel anger or sadness, just a quiet gratitude that some lessons take distance to bloom. Later that night, before bed, she opened her drawer and looked at the letter one last time. She didn't tear it up. She didn't send it either. Instead, she whispered into the still air, "Maybe someday you'll understand." And maybe, somewhere under a different sky, he was whispering the same thing. 3 months passed before he found the courage to go. The snow in Manhattan had melted into gray slush, the streets awake again with ambition and noise. But Daniel Cole no longer moved with the same rhythm as the city. He'd rebuilt the company's reputation, reshaped its culture, even regained the board's trust. Yet no amount of success could quiet the emptiness that followed him everywhere he went. He'd climbed the mountain again only to find that the summit was silent. So, one morning, without warning, he packed a single bag, turned off his phone, and boarded a flight west. Denver greeted him with thin air and wide skies. He rented a car, drove for an hour through winding roads that glimmered with leftover frost, until he saw the lake, the same lake she'd mentioned once, in passing. "It's where my father goes to fish when he forgets what peace feels like." He parked, stepped out into the cold, and found her sitting by the shore. Clara Bennett wore a wool coat and a quiet expression, her breath a small cloud in the morning air. A thermos sat beside her, steam curling from the lid. For a long time, he didn't speak. He just watched her, how still she was, how steady. Finally, she turned, sensing him the way you sense sunlight before you see it. "Daniel," she said softly. "Clara." It wasn't surprise in her voice, or even anger. Just calm acknowledgement, like she'd expected this moment to come eventually. He took a cautious step closer. "You look well." "I'm learning to be," she said. He nodded, his throat tightening. "You left quietly. You told me to," she said, "even if you didn't say the words out loud." He winced. "I deserve that." She looked back at the water. "Why are you here, Daniel?" He hesitated. Then, "Because I finally understood what I broke." They walked along the frozen edge of the lake, the crunch of snow beneath their feet filling the silence between them. "I spent years building things," he said slowly. "A company, a name, an image. I told myself that control was the same as strength, that feelings were distractions." He paused, the wind tugging at his coat. "But when you left, everything I built kept running, and somehow it all stopped working. The systems, the people, me." Clara didn't speak, only listened. He went on, his voice rough with honesty. "You were right. I built an empire but forgot how to feel." She stopped walking, turned to face him. "And now you do?" "I'm learning," he said quietly. "Mostly from what I lost." The lake was still, the surface reflecting the pale sky. She looked at him for a long moment, searching his face for truth, and found it. Her voice softened. "I don't hate you, Daniel." He exhaled, a small sound of disbelief. "You should." "I did," she said. "For a while. But hate is heavy, and I've carried enough." They stood in silence, watching the water move. Finally, Clara spoke again. "You came all this way to say that no." His eyes met hers. "I came to ask for forgiveness." She looked away, blinking back tears she hadn't expected. "I forgave you weeks ago," she said. "I just haven't figured out what to do with it yet." They found a bench overlooking the lake and sat, the winter sun painting everything gold and silver. Daniel leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "You were the best thing that ever happened to that company. To me, flattery doesn't fix trust," she said gently. "It's not flattery, it's fact." He turned to her. "You saw people, Clara, not positions, not performance metrics, people. You led without trying to lead, and I was too blind to see it." She smiled faintly. "You saw it. You just didn't want to admit it." He laughed softly. Probably true. For a while, they just sat there, no walls, no titles, no power between them. Only two people who had both learned how fragile strength could be. When the silence turned easy again, Daniel reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folder. "I didn't come just to apologize," he said, handing it to her. She frowned. Opening it, inside were documents stamped with the company logo, Aurora Division Denver Branch. "What is this?" she asked. "The next phase," he said. "A chance to build something that feels right this time." Her brow furrowed. "You're offering me a job?" "I'm offering you your job," he said. "Your own division. You'd lead the Aurora branch here, in Denver. Full autonomy. Your vision, your team." She stared at the papers, then at him. "Why me? Because no one else could make people believe again," he said simply. "You did it once. You could do it again." She shook her head, a half smile breaking through. "You really don't give up, do you? Not when it matters." Her eyes softened. "Daniel, this means more than you know, but I don't know if I can go back. Not yet." "I'm not asking you to," he said. "I'm just leaving the door open. For when you're ready." The wind picked up, carrying the faint scent of pine. Daniel looked out at the lake, his voice lower now. "When my father was still lucid," he said, "he used to tell me, 'You can't fix what you won't face.'" I didn't understand what he meant until now. Clara nodded slowly. "Sometimes facing something means standing still long enough to feel it." He smiled, eyes shining with something almost like peace. "Then, I guess this is me standing still." She smiled back. "It's a good start." They sat in companionable silence as the sun began to set, turning the lake into a sheet of amber glass. For once, neither needed to say what might come next. It was enough to have reached this point to have seen the cracks, the mending, the fragile beauty of what remained. As Daniel stood to leave, she rose too. He extended a hand, and she took it. "Take care, Clara," he said. "You too, Daniel." Their hands lingered for a heartbeat longer than necessary. Then he turned and walked toward his car, his figure shrinking against the fading light. Clara watched until he disappeared around the bend. Then she looked down at the folder, still in her hands, the future, waiting patiently. For the first time in months, she didn't feel like she was running from something. She was walking toward it. Portland smelled like rain and cedar, like beginnings that didn't ask for permission. The air carried that soft dampness only the Pacific Northwest could master, a mix of clouds, salt, and second chances. Clara Bennett had lived there for 2 months, long enough to know the rhythm of the city, the barista who drew hearts in her morning latte, the bookstore owner who always slipped an extra bookmark into her bag, the sound of gulls that replaced New York's sirens. Her new office was smaller than Cole and Finch's glass towers, a modest 3-story building with brick walls and ivy crawling up the side. But it breathed easier. People greeted her by name. They respected her ideas. Every morning, she walked along the Willamette River before work, a paper cup warming her hands. Sometimes she thought about Denver, sometimes about her mother, and sometimes about Daniel, but only in brief flashes, like a photograph she wasn't quite ready to put away. The Portland branch of Aurora Innovations wasn't glamorous, but it was thriving. Clara had been asked to help restructure operations, to bring humanity back into the workflow, as Daniel's email had said. She'd laughed when she read that line the first time the Daniel Cole she met a year ago would never have written it, but she could see his sincerity in every small decision he'd made since she didn't report directly to him anymore. Her chain of command ended with a kind regional director who trusted her instincts. Yet, every few weeks, there was a short email from Daniel. Cold ECVI Group. Calm, how's Portland treating you? Remember to get outside once in a while. Your last presentation was brilliant, don't argue. It was Clara kept them in a folder labeled Unsent Replies, not because she didn't want to respond, but because each message carried just enough warmth to fill the silence without reopening the ache. Sometimes she would start typing back, "You'd love the coffee here," or "The team is incredible," but she'd stop halfway. They were learning how to exist in each other's orbits without colliding again. And that, she realized, was its own kind of love. Her days found balance again, at work. She guided her small team through deadlines and brainstorms, blending structure with empathy. When a junior designer made a costly mistake that delayed a client launch, Clara didn't scold. She gathered the team after hours, ordered pizza, and said simply, "We fix it together." They did. And the next morning, her team left a sticky note on her desk. "You make chaos feel safe." The words stopped her cold, the same ones Daniel had once said to her in New York. For a moment, she sat in silence, tracing the letters with her thumb, remembering his voice and the soft glow of a city at night. Maybe healing wasn't about forgetting, she thought. Maybe it was about learning to remember without pain. Evenings were quieter. She rented a small apartment near the edge of Forest Park, just 1 bedroom, full of plants and books and silence she no longer feared. Sometimes she'd video call her father, who now recognized her voice more often than not. Still working too hard, he would tease, his smile slow but genuine. "Only a little," she'd reply, holding up a mug of tea. "You taught me that good work deserves patience." He'd chuckle, the sound rasped but full of life. "I taught you stubbornness, kid. The rest, you figured out yourself." Those calls grounded her. They reminded her why she'd fought so hard to stay steady, to rebuild without losing herself. By spring, Portland felt like home. She'd learned the city's moods the way fog curled around the bridges at dawn, how sunlight slipped shyly between clouds at noon, and how the rain always returned by evening, steady as forgiveness. Her work thrived. Clients praised her balance of logic and empathy. Her team started calling her Captain Bennett. She laughed at the nickname, but secretly cherished it. In the quiet hours after the office emptied, she'd sometimes stand by the window, watching the city lights reflect on the wet streets. Her thoughts wandered, not in longing, but gratitude. Daniel's last message had arrived 2 weeks ago. I saw the quarterly results. You built something good. Clara, something real. Proud of you." She hadn't replied. She didn't need to. Some things were better felt than said. One Sunday afternoon, while buying groceries, she caught her reflection in a shop window, hair loosely tied, face calm, eyes no longer haunted by what-ifs. For the first time, she saw not the woman who left New York, or the secretary who'd once fallen for her boss, but a woman who had rebuilt from the quiet up. She smiled at the reflection, a private smile of recognition. Love, she realized, wasn't about rescue. It wasn't about needing someone to make you whole. It was about walking your own path strongly enough that when love came back around, it met you standing tall. That night, she sat by the window with a candle lit and wrote in her journal, "Maybe we were meant to fall apart so we could learn how to stand alone. Maybe love isn't a destination, but a bridge, something you keep building, plank by plank, from both sides." Outside, rain began again, soft, steady, endless, and for the first time in a long while, Clara felt not lonely, but ready. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, printed on heavy paper that smelled faintly of cedar and ink. Cole and Finch Innovations embossed in silver at the top. Clara turned it over twice before opening it, her thumb tracing the neat signature at the bottom, Daniel Cole, Chief Executive Officer. Inside were words that could have changed the trajectory of anyone's life. "We would like to offer you the position of Vice President of Operations, based at our New York headquarters. Your leadership in Portland has set a new benchmark for our company's culture. It's time to bring that spirit home. Home." The word echoed in her mind long after she'd set the letter down. For hours, she couldn't move. Her coffee went cold on the desk. Rain brushed softly against the window pane, the familiar Portland lullaby that usually comforted her, but not today. She closed her eyes, and in the quiet, memories came rushing back, New York's glass towers, the hum of the elevators, Daniel's voice across the boardroom table, the city that had both broken and remade her. Returning would mean facing all of it again, the whispers, the stares, the ghosts of who she used to be. Her heart whispered yes, but her fear said not yet. That evening, she walked by the river. The city lights shimmered like reflections of her indecision. Portland had become her sanctuary. She'd built something honest here, a team that respected her, a rhythm that belonged entirely to her. For the first time in years, she didn't wake up with dread in her chest. And yet, part of her wondered if staying meant she was hiding behind the comfort she'd built. When she told her father about the offer during their weekly call, he listened quietly, the phone crackling softly on his end. "You sound torn," he said. "I am," Clara admitted. "I finally feel settled here, peaceful. But if I go back, it'll be chaos all over again." Her father chuckled, a warm, aging sound. "You always did do your best work in the middle of chaos." She smiled despite herself. "Maybe. But I'm not sure I'm that brave anymore." "Bravery doesn't disappear, sweetheart," he said. "It just waits for the right reason to wake up." That night, Clara sat at her kitchen table, surrounded by quiet. She reread Daniel's signature on the letter, the familiar loops of his handwriting steady, assured, but softened somehow. She wondered if he had hesitated before signing it, if he'd paused, remembering the woman who once called him a self-absorbed jerk in an airport terminal. It felt like a lifetime ago. She took out her journal and wrote, "New York doesn't scare me. What scares me is who I might become if I go back. But maybe this time, I get to choose who that is." She closed the notebook and sat still until dawn began to touch the window glass with gray light. 2 days later, Clara stood in front of the small airport outside Portland, a single suitcase by her side. The terminal smelled of coffee and jet fuel, the scent of beginnings and goodbyes. Every sound, the rumble of engines, the echo of boarding calls pulled at memories she thought she'd buried. The last time she'd stood in an airport like this, she'd collided with a man in a tailored suit, spilled coffee on his chest, and changed both their lives forever. Now, years later. She was back in almost the same place, but everything inside her had changed. Her reflection in the terminal glass didn't look uncertain anymore. There were fine lines around her eyes. Yes, the kind that come from living fully, not merely surviving. She thought of the people waiting for her in New York, the new colleagues who had only read about her success in memos, and Daniel, who would undoubtedly try to keep things professional. That word had built a wall between them once. Now, she was determined to walk through it, not for him, not even for redemption, for herself, because she'd spent enough time learning how to heal. Now it was time to lead. At the check-in counter, the agent smiled politely. Flight to New York. Clara hesitated, the sound of those words unlocking something deep within her. She nodded slowly. Yes. One way. The woman printed her ticket, slid it across the counter. Safe travels. Ms. Bennett. Thank you, Clara said softly. I think I finally will. As she waited near her gate, a small child dropped a stuffed rabbit and burst into tears. Without thinking, Clara knelt to pick it up and handed it back with a smile. The mother thanked her. First flight, Clara asked the child gently. The girl nodded, eyes wide. It's not so bad, Clara said. Sometimes the air gets bumpy, but that just means you're getting somewhere new. The little girl smiled, clutching the toy tighter. As they walked away, Clara realized she was speaking to herself as much as to the child. When the boarding call came, she stood, heart steady. Outside the tall windows, a plane rose into the cloudy morning sky, silver against gray, cutting through turbulence towards something unseen. Clara watched it until it disappeared. Then she whispered to herself, I'm not going back to who I was. I'm going forward to who I'm becoming. She lifted her suitcase and walked toward Gate 14, the same number as the gate where her life had first shifted course. It felt poetic, as if the universe had circled back, handing her the pen to write her next chapter. When the flight attendant smiled and said, Welcome aboard, Clara smiled back, calm and certain. This time, she wasn't running from heartbreak or chasing redemption. She was walking into her future not because of Daniel Cole, but because Clara Bennett was finally ready to become her own beginning. New York greeted her with rain soft, rhythmic, almost ceremonial. It wasn't the harsh, hurried drizzle she remembered, but something gentler, as if the city itself had changed its tone to match hers. Clara Bennett stepped out of the taxi, her heels clicking on the wet pavement outside Cole and Finch Innovations. The building rose like memory itself, all glass and light and echoes of her past. But this time, she didn't feel small walking through its doors. The marble floors, the mirrored elevators, even the scent of polished steel, none of it intimidated her anymore. It was just a place she was ready to redefine. When the elevator doors opened onto the 45th floor, she paused, every sound phone's ringing, quiet laughter. The rustle of papers carried a strange familiarity. Then she saw him. Daniel Cole stood near the boardroom, surrounded by executives and department heads. He looked older, not in years, but in gravity. The sharpness of power in his eyes had softened into something quieter, steadier. He turned as if he'd felt her presence before seeing her. Their eyes met across the glass corridor. Neither spoke, but something unspoken passed between them. Acknowledgement, respect, a shared memory of what it had taken to arrive here. The meeting began with the usual formalities: quarterly reports, projections, the language of business that had once been a battlefield between them. Clara sat near the end of the long table, composed and calm. She could feel the weight of curious glances, whispers brushing like wind. Everyone knew who she was, the woman who had once left the company in silence and now returned with her name engraved on the vice president's door. Daniel stood at the head of the table, hands clasped lightly behind his back. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the same confidence it always had, but the edge was gone. Before we continue, he said, there's someone I'd like to acknowledge. The room fell quiet. He turned slightly, his gaze finding hers. This company, he said, has weathered more than its share of storms. And every time we've rebuilt, It's because someone reminded us that innovation doesn't start in spreadsheets, it starts in people. He nodded toward her. The woman who taught me that leadership begins with listening, and that strength isn't control, it's compassion. A hush rippled through the room, then the sound of polite applause. Clara's cheeks warmed, but she held his gaze, offering a small, steady smile. For once, she didn't shrink under the spotlight. She belonged here. After the meeting, as the crowd dispersed in waves of chatter and congratulations, Daniel lingered near the windows overlooking Manhattan. The skyline shimmered through rain-streaked glass, vast, untouchable, and yet so close. Clara approached, her steps quiet on the polished floor. "You didn't have to say all that," she said softly. He turned, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "I did?" Her eyes met his. "You meant it. Every word," he said, especially the part about listening. "I spent years talking at people, expecting them to follow. You showed me how to lead by hearing what isn't said." She exhaled slowly. "You've changed." "So have you," he said. "Maybe that's why this doesn't feel like going back. It feels like starting right." They walked side by side down the quiet hallway toward the private conference lounge, the one where they had once argued until midnight about project deadlines and company ideals. Now, it felt different. The air no longer tense, but open. He poured them both coffee, handed her a cup, and said quietly, "Do you remember the night we stayed up fixing the Aurora report?" "How could I forget," she said, with a small laugh. "You nearly fell asleep standing?" "I remember more than that," he said, his tone softer now. "I remember how calm you were when everything was falling apart. I envied that." She sipped her coffee, studying him. "It wasn't calm," she said. "It was fear turned inside out." Daniel looked at her for a long moment. "You make fear look like courage." The words landed between them, gentle and heavy all at once. Silence stretched the kind that wasn't empty, but full of everything unsaid. Then he spoke again, lower this time. "Clara, there's something I need to tell you before we both get buried in meetings and formality." She set her cup down, her heartbeat quickening. "Go on." He took a breath. "When you left, I told myself it was for the best. That professionalism mattered more than whatever this was. But I realized I wasn't protecting the company. I was protecting my fear." He stepped closer, his voice barely above a whisper. "This time, I won't let fear dictate us." Her breath caught. "Daniel." He shook his head gently. "I'm not asking for anything. Not promises, not answers. I just needed to say that out loud to you, not to a boardroom or a mirror." Clara looked up at him, eyes searching his face. The sincerity there was almost unbearable, not grand or desperate, just real. "I think," she said slowly, "that's the bravest thing you've ever done." He smiled faintly, relief breaking through the weight in his eyes. "You always did call my bluffs." "Only the dramatic ones," she teased softly. He laughed, a quiet, genuine sound that filled the room like warmth. When the laughter faded, he looked at her again, steady, certain. "No speeches this time," he said. "No timing, no conditions. Just this: I missed you, Clara, every day. Not the way people miss comfort, but the way they miss the part of themselves they hadn't realized was gone." Her eyes shimmered, tears forming but never falling. "I missed you too," she said, "but I think we both needed to learn how to stand on our own before we could stand together." He nodded, his smile soft. "Then, maybe now, we finally can." They stood in silence, watching the city pulse below. No promises, no illusions, just two people who had already broken and rebuilt enough to understand that love wasn't about possession, it was about presence. And in that rain-soaked morning, standing side by side in a room once filled with conflict, they found something far rarer than forgiveness. Peace. The lake was still that morning, a mirror of sky and memory. Soft wind moved through the aspens, carrying the scent of pine and summer rain. Clara Bennett stood by the water's edge, her hands folded gently around a bouquet of wildflowers. She wore no veil, no diamonds, no spectacle, just a pale linen dress and a smile that reached her eyes. Across from her, Daniel Cole adjusted his tie, laughing quietly when it refused to stay straight. Still trying to control everything she teased. He looked up, mock offended. Old habits die hard. Then let this one die today, she said, reaching to fix it for him. He caught her hand halfway, lacing his fingers through hers. Only if you promise to keep teaching me how. I've been teaching you for years, she said softly. You just finally started listening. It had been 1 year since the day she'd stepped back into his company, into his life, not as an assistant or a subordinate, but as his equal. Together, they rebuilt not just projects, but trust. The company had changed too. Meetings began with conversation, not commands. Employees stayed late because they wanted to, not because they feared to. Cole and Finch had become something rare in the corporate world, human, and so had Daniel. When he asked her to marry him, it wasn't over a grand dinner or under a spotlight. It was on a quiet afternoon in Denver, while they walked the same path along the lake where they'd once made peace. He'd stopped mid-sentence, turned to her, and simply said, "Clara, I don't want a life that doesn't have your laughter in it. Will you marry me?" She'd said yes, not because of the words, but because they didn't sound like a promise to own her. They sounded like a vow to walk beside her. Now. As the officiant smiled and motioned for them to begin, Clara felt time itself slow. The ceremony was small, just a few close friends. Daniel's father sitting in a wheelchair near the front, and the gentle hum of the Colorado wind. Daniel's voice trembled slightly as he began his vows. "For most of my life," he said, "I thought love was a weakness. That to lead, I had to stand above everything and everyone." He paused, eyes meeting hers. "Then you walked into my life and spilled coffee on my ego." Laughter rippled through the small gathering. "But you also taught me," he continued, "that strength isn't about control. It's about trust. It's about knowing that when the storm comes, someone will still stand beside you not to fix it, but to weather it together." He reached into his pocket, pulling out a small box. Inside lay a delicate silver necklace, a pendant shaped like 2 wings, joined at the center. As he fastened it around her neck, he whispered, "You never needed me to lift you. You were already flying." Clara blinked back tears, her voice steady but soft. "Maybe, but it feels good to fly beside someone who finally learned to let go." After the ceremony, they walked down the narrow pier that stretched into the lake. The guests lingered behind, music playing faintly in the distance, while the world around them settled into quiet. Daniel slipped his jacket over her shoulders. "Cold, a little," she said, "but mostly grateful." He smiled. "For what?" "For everything that fell apart," she said, "because it had to. So this could happen." He nodded, watching a pair of geese glide across the water. "Funny how we spent so much time trying to control the wind and all along. We just had to trust the wings." Clara rested her head against his shoulder. "We both had to learn that." They stood in silence, letting the breeze carry the sounds of laughter from the shore. Then, above them, the distant hum of an airplane drifted through the sky. They both looked up. The plane cut across the clouds, gleaming silver in the afternoon sun, just like the one that had once carried them from Denver to New York. 2 strangers sitting side by side, unaware of the journey ahead. Clara smiled. "Full circle," she murmured. Daniel nodded. "Except this time, we know where we're going." "Do we?" she teased. "Not exactly," he said, grinning. "But for once. I'm okay, not knowing." As the plane disappeared into the horizon, the officiant's words lingered in Clara's mind. Marriage is not the union of 2 halves, but the meeting of 2 wholes. She squeezed Daniel's hand gently, the wings at her neck catching the sunlight. A whisper of gratitude rose in her chest for every mistake, every silence, every heartbreak that had led them here. Because love, she realized, isn't a rescue mission or a fairy tale ending. It's a series of choices to stay open, to forgive, to grow, and to begin again. That evening, as dusk fell, the lake turned to liquid gold. Friends toasted with champagne, laughter echoing through the mountains. Daniel's father raised his glass and said, "To the son who learned to listen and the woman who taught him how." Everyone cheered. Clara laughed, cheeks flushed, eyes bright. For once, the sound of applause didn't make her shrink, it simply made her grateful. She leaned toward Daniel. "Do you think we deserve all this?" He looked at her with that quiet steadiness she'd fallen for, the same steadiness she now carried within herself. "No," he said softly, "I think we earned it. Later." As the last of the guests drifted away and twilight deepened over the lake, Clara and Daniel sat on the dock, their feet bare, the water cool beneath them. "Do you ever think about that morning at the airport?" she asked. He chuckled. "Every time I see coffee?" She nudged him playfully. "You're lucky I didn't ruin your whole suit." "You did," he said, "and maybe that was the best thing that ever happened to me." They fell quiet again, the stars just beginning to show. Above them, another airplane crossed the night sky, its lights blinking softly against the dark. Clara watched it until it faded. Then she whispered, almost to herself, "Love isn't about control or rescue. It's about finding someone who lets you be more yourself than you ever thought possible." Daniel turned to her, brushed a strand of hair from her face, and kissed her forehead. "Then we did it right," he said. And there, under the wide Colorado sky, where once everything had fallen apart, two souls finally rested, not in perfection, but in peace. Life has a quiet way of teaching us that strength isn't found in control, it's found in compassion. Clara and Daniel's journey reminds us that success means very little if we forget how to feel, and love means nothing if it demands we lose ourselves. We all stumble through our own airports of fate, rushing, colliding, misunderstanding. But sometimes, those collisions reveal who we truly are: forgiveness, humility, and the courage to begin again. These are the real victories that time and money can't buy. For anyone who's ever loved, lost, and learned to rebuild, remember this: you're never too old to change, to heal, or to open your heart again. Because love, in its truest form, doesn't rescue you. It reminds you that you were capable all along. So, take a breath, let go of pride, call someone you miss, and when life throws a little turbulence your way, trust that sometimes it's only clearing the skies for something beautiful to begin. Thank you for spending your time with Shining Stories today. If Clara and Daniel's journey touched your heart, even just a little, we hope you'll take a moment to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Every story we tell is made with love, reflection, and a belief that hope still lives quietly in all of us. Your support helps these stories find more hearts, people who, like you, still believe in kindness, redemption, and second chances. So, until our next story, take care of your heart, hold close the ones you love, and remember, every ending is just the beginning of something beautiful. Thank you for watching Shining Stories.